listening to the Adventure Party for the 4th week of September 2021. This week, is the party going to get to the point? Or are they going to wander a bit? Let's find out. The Adventure Party, discussing tabletop and video gaming the Irish way.
Welcome to the party. I'm Dave.
I'm still Savage.
And I remain a Scarr.
Yeah, so travel versus exploration. Yeah, you could dig into both either very easily. So we're going to focus on exploration, as in the digging down into those dark and secret places.
Or just the secluded places in a world given over to wilderness and mystery. Yeah. I dig that vibe.
I think that a lot of the problems that some DMs have with travel and exploration is that they sort of mistake one for the other. This is my theory, is that a lot of times a GM will just plop down a map. They plop out this fully done out map made by the finest Imperial cartographers and then tell players to explore it, or they will just invent a destination in their mind and tell players to travel to it, and those are not how you do those things.
Yeah, they are wildly different, and we are going to focus on exploration today. To travel is to have an objective in mind, one that you know the location of.
Yes.
To explore is to perhaps have an objective in mind, but have no darn idea where the heck it is.
There was a very good article recently on our RPG site called The Alexandrian that I think really laid this out very well. If you're traveling, you know where you're going and you know how to get there. Those are the prerequisites for travel. You know the what you want to get to, you know where it is, and you know how to get there. Exploration is where one or more of those three questions has not been answered. If you take out the how do we get there, you're not traveling, you're trailblazing, you're going through terrain, you're exploring for the path, as it were. If you take out the where, now you're searching. You know what you want, but you don't know where it is. So you need to go around looking for it. And if you don't know the what, if you literally don't have any idea what's around here to find, then you're just indulging in curiosity. So like, what's down this corridor? What's in this forest?
Sometimes deadly curiosity.
Yes. But the point is, if all the questions of these things have already been answered, then you're not in a exploration mode. You're in a travel mode. So that sort of level of mystery and lack of information is essential to exploration. There has to be something about what's here that you don't know, whether it's getting to it or if it's even there at all. And if if all questions are answered, it's just not. You're just going to a place.
I like to think of this in terms of what are your action verbs in a game. It's an idea stolen from Tim Rogers. Action.net. Go and watch his stuff on YouTube. It's amazing. But Tim talks about video games primarily, but he spends an awful lot of time talking about what the verbs are. And in role-playing, at least kind of the kind of role-playing we're talking about, which is maybe sword and sorcery, fantasy stuff, you've got fight is a verb, talk is a verb, and explore is a verb, as opposed to travel. As we've kind of pointed out, travel is getting there. But once you're there at the interesting place, you're going to explore. Anyone who's ever cracked open a set of dungeon tiles or laid out the grid knows that they're in for some exploring. You don't know what's in there, and you don't know what you're going to do with it when you find it. But in you go nonetheless. So I think explore is a hugely important verb when we roleplay, at least in the kind of the tabletop sense. We could get into exploring emotional spaces or political spaces, perhaps, but I'll probably just limit my comments to the exploration that is done by turning over rocks and opening doors that aren't yours.
Dave, you've been running some exploration-based games lately, haven't you?
Oh yeah, Travelers on a Red Road. It's an interesting little gem. The author made the PDF pay as you want, when lockdown kicked in, which was nice of him. And it's a flintlock and sorcery setting, as he describes it. It's more like late Renaissance, early modern era, but set in an area of the world of a world inspired by Eastern Siberian tribes and Northwest Pacific tribes. The magic system is heavily based on spirits, as in making deals with spirits to learn things or to do things. Like the area's like got the technology you'd expect from that description. They have rifles, they have pistols. There's gunpowder knocking around. There's the universities, but if you go away from the cities, there's a lot of wilderness. There are ancient ruins. There's empires that have risen and fallen. So hence the and sorcery bit.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they actually have extensive enough rules compared to the size of the combat section anyway for travel and exploration. I won't touch on the overland stuff as much, but going into an area and exploring it can be actually you have to take things into consideration. Hunger and thirst are actually issues. There are actually sections on finding water, hunting game, gathering, say, plants. Light is an issue. Most characters are not going to have anything like dark vision, so torches are very, very important. And without magic isn't trivial, so you're not going to have cast light on a stone thing going on. So if you run out of light underground or in the middle of the night when you're being ambushed, it's a serious problem. And it certainly adds a certain flavor of exploring is very dangerous, and you need to be prepared for it.
Yeah, I think that's something that's missing from a lot of more traditional games is the sense of challenge. Like a lot of people, like the designers of 5th Ed go off and off about how they have these 3 pillars. There's combat, and there's social encounters, and there's exploration. These are our 3 pillars. But they haven't put a lot of effort into making that 3rd pillar challenging. In fact, they've done the opposite, by they've made the ranger, which is basically win at travel and exploration.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just like, without the challenge, exploration cannot be a gameplay feature, because it's just, we roll dice at the problem until it falls over.
And it is wild. You should mention the ranger. It is the class that, if you want to be an explorer, you're probably going to pick this, and it cuts the knees out from under exploration entirely by the mechanics of 5th Ed. It's very frustrating. I don't know. I do love that overland sort of strider idea, that style of character. And then you kind of pick ranger, think this is going to be great, got to put my backpack on, got to get some provisions, got to chew a lot of black root, it'd be great. And it's like, well, I just use my ranger ability, we find our way there without any trouble. Well, that's boring.
Yeah, that's very unsatisfying.
But then again, I think it might even be related to the problem with hackers in other systems. Exploring, finding game, finding fresh water, finding shelter while you explore an area is kind of like waiting for the decker to get done with his decking stuff in Shadowrun. The rest of the party are sitting around going, well, they're having fun finding rabbits, but what are we meant to do? So yeah, there's 2 extremes there. Entire systems that are just given over to it, or a class feature that kind of negates the problem altogether. Not a lot of middle ground.
There's a sort of a problem of how competent do we assume a certain character is at setting up camp, making a little fire, searching for rabbits or firewood or whatever. No one wants to define that strongly, because then it might limit the types of characters people play. But then again, then you don't have explicit, this many people will make this camp this quickly kind of mechanics, so people don't feel like they're doing anything. Whereas the ranger's off rolling dice, or not rolling dice as the case may be, and getting things done.
All of that simply serves to provision yourself for exploring, though. But exploring itself is something that everyone can engage in, right?
Ideally, I would definitely recommend, if you're going to do a big mechanical bent on this kind of exploration or long distance travel, into the unknowns, that you invest in, mechanics that get the entire party involved. Like, just like, even if it's just as little, like, if you roll a 12 plus, you add +1 to the Rangers roll. I don't know. Something to make sure that people don't feel useless, that they're part of this.
I know that Adventures in Middle-earth has, when you're on a journey, you have different roles like scouting and hunting and whatnot, and I think that might be, along the lines of what you're talking about there.
Yeah, like in actual real life exploration, if you're literally going into the wilds alone, there's an awful lot to do. Like, setting up camp might not be terribly exciting, but it is a vital skill. Checking everyone's health might be very passive, but it's important. It depends on how much you're going to abstract the actual act of moving around. That's a system by system thing, but definitely if you want an exploration bent, you need to make sure that everyone is involved in some way, or, that they're not, at least if they want to get involved, they can do something.
Yeah, there's a two-part process to exploring, isn't there? There's the how do we get around the area, and then there's the what do we find that is worth stopping and considering. And that part is where you pull everybody's focus back now and say, right, you found a door with a mouth where the lock should be, or you found a goblin village that seemed to be getting ready for a festival. What are you going to do? And that's, at that point, we're into encounters. And they can be varied, they can be weird, they can be brief. Or one of the key things to keep in mind when you're running an exploring heavy game is that you probably don't want to have hours of content stored up in one room or one hex or one encounter. It's a sort of a sprinkling of ideas. You can get real Alice in Wonderland with it and just put in little vignettes, little NPCs you've always wanted to put in a game, strange encounters that you're nicking from other books you've read, and let the characters sort of interact with them briefly. Probably most importantly about exploring, note it on the map. We can come back to this later, or we've dealt with this, or we got this thing here, and move on. One of the joys for me of exploring is filling in all the unknown spaces. You don't necessarily have to win in every space or even engage in every space, but you know it's there. And later on, when you meet the dryad who wants an audience for her singing, and you know that the Goblin Village are getting ready for a festival, the tumblers kind of turn in your brain, and you're like, oh, maybe we could offer the dryad a feature role in the festival, assuming you didn't kill the goblins. Just don't kill people. People are getting ready for festivals. See previous episode. Don't need adventurers plowing in and killing them. Offer to do something, like, get the basilisk they need for the to be King Basilisk for the festival. See Puck Fair in Kerry. It's amazing.
It is.
But yeah, that's a good point. It's like there's sort of an argument over which way to do this kind of exploration, whether you only have like a couple of landmarks and everything else is randomly encountered, or if you hex crawl. Like, you fill in every square or hex on your map with some feature. And what I think you do there is, like, if you're just traveling, then the random encounters are probably much smarter because they allow you to spice up the process of traveling with interesting things going on based on that terrain. But if you're exploring, then you probably want to do that sort of done-out hex crawl element with maybe some random encounters as well, but you want that hidden map because then you have details everywhere for the players to find, and you can figure out how the different elements interact. Like, if you're relying on your random encounter table to find something for the Goblin Village, then you might very quickly find yourself out of luck because they just keep finding trolls that aren't known for their singing voice but are known for eating vases.
Like, random encounters can be quite a useful tool, as you're alluding to, for giving a certain feel to exploration. Because if you're getting a lot of very dangerous encounters, it's telling you something about that area. This area is not particularly under civilized control. There's like very dangerous monsters like running riot. Whereas if you're in the middle of a deserted wilderness and there really is not much around, then any encounter is notable because, there might, say if the encounter tables are saying like there's a 5% chance that you see anything living. Those are very different vibes.
Yeah, and obviously you would want to adjust your tables to fit that vibe that you have. Again, are you going to be in a whole bunch of different areas, in which case you want a couple of small tables, or is the campaign focused on exploring this one big area, in which case, well, you might still have small tables for subsections, like there's the goblin kind of table near the goblin village, and there's the dryad kind of table near the dryad's tree, and so forth. But yes, you definitely want to have some that unpredictability, because it's exploration. It's meant to be you're meant to be in the unknown, and having the DM be in that anything be around the next corner vibe as well helps with that vibe at the table.
Yeah.
But if people are in an exploration mode, there should be something to explore, and making it up on the fly, you're not really in exploring a space, you're traveling through that space. If everything is random, then it's not a place you can't master a dice table. You master a place. So you need to have that sense of place to explore.
Yeah. Like if you're to revisit the talk about tables, giving it an atmosphere to an area. If you're nearing the Lizardmen village, like those tables can be just showing more and more entries for lizardmen and their pet dinosaurs or whatever. So that can give you clues.
Yeah, so there's really, from the game setup side, there's two modes here. There's exploring with your players, as you say, kind of a random or semi-random aspect of the game, or it's all sort of laid out. You've figured it out. You've laid out the space to be explored. You know what is where, and you've probably put those things there for a very good reason. But the players may not necessarily encounter them all in the same order. The Hot Springs?
Hot Springs Island.
Hot Springs Island is a great example of the latter, where it's all laid out. GM gonna read it, and now it's up to the players to explore the hex map. And there are defined things in each of those hexes. There's entire sessions of play in some of them. But yeah, I suppose it depends on who's getting the most satisfaction out of exploring. And by the way, folks, if you're exploring, make maps. Great old RPG skill, map making, plotting out what you've seen and where you've seen it for later. So you want to be keeping track of all of this. So make a map. And speaking of maps, well, I was going to use that to segue to the spaces we most often explore in games, which are dungeons.
Full of adventure.
Full of adventure, places to catch your ankle, and monsters. But most importantly, the rewards for exploration. What are they?
Magic items, loot.
straight to the gear. Yeah.
Also secrets, spell books, people to rescue, people to meet, people to make friends with, people to make enemies with, people to kill.
Yeah.
Like, especially more the sword and sorcery settings where you don't have handy magic shops or wizards like mass producing magic items. Ancient dungeons from Forgotten Ruins might be the only way to get magic items or spell books or learn anything about the setting, depending on how old they are.
Yeah, and generally, if a GM wants to put a dungeon in front of the players, the best way to get them interested is to put the things they want in dungeons, and then hide them so that they have to actually explore the dungeon and not just walk through each of the 5 rooms in order.
Yes, and use that exploration and those items and those dungeons as a way to tell the story of the place the players are in. Be it uncovering the past or discovering those secrets or learning the hidden relationships between places. Oh, we explored and discovered that the healing well that the dwarves rely on, its origin is actually in this drow fortress deep beneath their city. And they don't know that, but we do now. That's probably going to be valuable information for somebody, and probably explains all the spider bites.
Like a non-tabletop RPG example comes to mind, Dark Souls. because in that franchise, a lot of the background isn't explicitly said, but you pick it up as you explore. That word again. The game, game spaces, and look, find items, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Oh, and Dark Souls offers another very good lesson here. The act of exploring also opens up one of the other mainstays of Dark Souls, shortcuts. So when you explore the Dark Souls space, you eventually discover that there are quicker ways between these places you've been traveling back and forth to. And going back to the trailblazing you mentioned, Scarr, you can use, especially in a hex crawler, if you're, say, given the task of exploring a place, you can use shortcuts as a way of rewarding in-depth exploration that you can find. Because if you're spending a lot of time in the space, you don't want to spend a lot of time doing the other thing, traveling, that we're not talking about today. One of the rewards for exploration is the shortcut, the better path. And speaking of better paths, no, this is a terrible segue. I'm just going to open a beer. This episode, I'm exploring north of the border. Oh, it just fell into place now. With the Bull House Brewing Company, who have produced a beer called Small Axe, which is a session beer. So the next 4 or 5 of these will be grand. But here we go. Back over to you, Dave.
Okay. So just going about those secrets, those shortcuts could be incredibly valuable. Actually, a sci-fi example comes to mind, Warhammer 40k Rogue Trader, where warp routes and ways in and out of systems or entire sectors of space could be amazingly valuable. If you've got a warp route that's twice as quick as a warp route anyone else has a map for, your profits can skyrocket. You might even have exclusive use of planets because nobody else can reach them.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen the navigator's table. If you've got a novice navigator pointing your ship in the right direction, you might only have a 40% chance of making a trip in one go, and you don't want to roll that many times in that weird warp events chart. So if you have something that gives you a plus 10 bonus or halves the number of random warp events you have to do, that's a big advantage.
Yeah, if you've got a good route, you don't need a big Geller field to get through there. So I guess that means that we can talk about reasons to explore, and one of those is definitely being hired on as a bunch of adventurers to discover a new trade route or to discover an easier path to the silver mine or anything else you might care to throw players. So exploration can be the objective in and of itself. You don't necessarily need to be finding something that's valuable to you as long as someone's paying you to find a route or a secret or something else. But for various reasons, they don't want to do it themselves. They're too busy. So a great way to introduce a patron to a campaign is to say, well, look, you've been tasked with discovering a new route through the stars or finding a way to transport these settlers overland through the hobgoblin-infested wastes safely to the coast where they can join the mining efforts. Something North America. You can have a lot of fun there. We've talked about some of the spaces we've explored. I've been desperately searching my hard drives while we've talked for what I consider a nice example of exploring. I'm going to have to dig this one out for the show notes, but it was a 2-pager, and it's got something to do with like an ice dragon and a pass through through some mountains. But it really nicely captured for me a lot of what we've talked about through 2 pages, a couple of tables, one table of like about 20 encounters. And the idea was that you pre-populated this route. You knew you were exploring the pass. You've got all these encounters at the GM to throw at the players. You don't know what events or encounters they're going to come across on any given day until you roll for it. And there's a dragon that considers the past theirs, is inimitably hostile to the players, but there are other denizens of the past. There's a hag, there's some orcs who are kind of hanging out at different points, and by using a linear table and maybe not using any rerolls, you can construct a path of exploration for your players that is unique that is going to throw up unique problems. Meeting the hag before you meet the dragon, before you meet the orcs, is different from meeting the orcs before you meet the hag, before you meet the dragon. And I ran it for, I think it took one session. I will find it. It's like a 2-page PDF. But I thought it was a great example of how little work you actually have to do to make a session feel like a really good session of exploring without necessarily doing a lot of the other things we've talked about. So it's Counterpoint. I'll find that one. Insert editor, something link.
Yeah, no, I'm actually very interested to see that. Like you say, you don't need massive amounts of rules and tables, to give a great atmosphere of we're exploring something a bit challenging, something that nobody from our I suppose back home has ever seen, like, or they haven't seen in like 100 generations or something.
I don't know. I'd like to swing back against that because, like, I'm going back to the Alexandrians part, and it made the argument that exploration needs 3 things to really pop as a process. One of them was the players have to be able to find things out, either before they set off by researching and asking people, or finding the hag or the orcs and asking for directions and what do you do when the dragon comes along, or they need to be able to find the information on the way by making their survival checks or climbing to the top of the mountain to take a look around, or other smart plays. There also has to be choices. There has to be meaningful, like, do we go into the swamp, or do we try to climb the mountain, or do we go through the hobgoblin-infested plains? Like, these have to be choices that the players have to mull over. If you don't have the choices, then it's just sort of a linear path, and it's basically back to travel again. But I think the most interesting one of these is there has to be the possibility of failure. There has to be possible for the players to not find the thing they're looking for in some way. Either they end up in the wrong place because they got lost, or they find the dragon and they can't get past the dragon, guess we're not getting to the city, or they run out of food, or their horses die, or something along those lines, and they gotta go back to town for more food and more horses. There has to be that element of failure, and it has to be a failure, not just a delay. It has to be you substantially do not get what you want, and you have to either start over or completely change your plan. Because without that element of challenge, of tension, it'd be like having fights where you're never going to die, or social encounters where the GM puts a timer on it, you roleplay for 30 minutes, and the Duke agrees with you. If something's going to be a pillar of play, there has to be challenge, and for challenge, there has to be the element of failure. And I think that's one of those things that's missing when people say, I don't see what the point of overland exploration is in my game. Well, it's because your players are going to win and going to find everything, that they just stay in the dungeon. Like, go back to dungeons. One of the most maligned things people say they hate about dungeon travels is, random encounters. It's just like, they're wasting so much of your time. But they're not wasting your time, they're wasting your hit points and your torches and your mules that you brought in for some reason. That's the point of the random encounter, is you have a time limit. You have to find the things that you want in this dungeon before you get your face eaten. The random encounters are the element of tension there.
I think time limits are tricky when it comes to exploration, because they work directly against the things that make exploration desirable. The time to feel out everything around you and actually explore it. If you're under time pressure, I'm not sure it's the best fit. I think it leads to a lot of dissatisfaction on both sides of the screen, because the GM is sort of pressuring the players to make decisions, keep moving, and watching them essentially run past all the interesting stuff that they've prepared. And the players are encountering things, having to make very quick decisions, or very sort of pragmatic decisions, and not getting to kind of feel out the place and engage in any mastery, because they just don't have time. They have to deal with everything as expeditiously as possible. I would be very wary of trying to juice your exploration with things like hard time limits. I do agree that exploring, as we spoke at the beginning, provisioning for exploring is important, if not always wildly entertaining. But the soft timers of do we have enough torches, do we have enough mules, if one of the mules gets eaten by a troll, does that mean that we can't take as much treasure out of the dungeon? Those are interesting limitations, and some of them serve as timers, but not the same way as it has to be done by dawn. Also, you've got to explore this entire place.
Yeah, if you have a linear plot or sort of thing, then you're essentially kind of back to travel. It's you have to get an objective by a certain point. That's not really distinguishable from we have to get to a city or thing. Like it's like we have to get to a place. The challenge is not to explore. The challenge is to figure out which of these ways is the right way to get to the place or get the thing and get back out. That's not what I'm talking about, though. Like, what I'm saying is, if you can't fail at exploration, if you can just live in the dungeon now, then I feel like there has to be some element that you have to take care of.
Well, you can't live in the dungeon. You're in there for a limited time, and the limitation is what you've brought with you and how well you use it, and what you can scrounge from the like. We're kind of into survival adventure at that point, which kind of marries into exploration. So yeah, figure out what you want to do with that and go with it.
Like something that just occurred to me, like you can, like depending on the sort of game you're running, you can put more emphasis on, well, you're running low on torches. What are you going to do for light? And players can think about, okay, do we want to say rip up some of the spare clothes, wrap them around some sticks and douse them in oil, like that sort of thing. Improvised weapons, even.
These ancient paintings that we run off the wall suddenly look very flammable.
They do.
The value of treasure can drop a bit when there's grim trolls and grus around.
Yeah, you can't eat gold. Well, you can. It's just not very productive.
Yeah, so finding those things in the dungeon that let you progress further or stay longer, I think is kind of one of the key parts of exploration as a survival mechanic, or as part of a kind of explore survive game. You could expand that out. I think there's the scope then to think about exploring different realities. Like a lot of different versions of D&D have alternate planes that are quite hostile to fleshy, rubbery life as we know it, and some of them, like exploring to find oases of calm or places where you can restock on those sort of things you need is vital. Then there's harsh world settings like Dark Sun also push exploration hard as a means of simply surviving.
Oh yeah.
It's not just like the difficulty of surviving the place. It can literally be the difficulty exploring the place. It's just like, well, you might be a ranger that has plus 15 to survival, but you're in the plane of elemental air. There's nothing but air for thousands of miles in every direction. How do you navigate to get to the lost temple of cloudiness?
Oh, wait. That's travel. Gotta pull you up. Gotta haul on the reins there. That's most definitely. So how do we get from A to B is travel, right?
Well, no. This is how do you find it? This is you don't know where the
you
don't know where
the
Temple of Cloudiness is. There's nothing. There's no landmarks. How do you navigate without landmarks?
You might be dropping them into a place that is as hostile to exploration as it is the player characters themselves, unless they got wings. Is it fair to say that the enemy temple is down?
Maybe.
I mean, it's all down. Yeah, well, not entirely dissimilar are worlds in science fiction and science fantasy games that aren't quite like Earth, that have toxic atmospheres or high or even low gravity, which all present their own particular issues.
Yeah, the fantastical is a perfect way to spice up. Like once your players are used to standard exploration, it's not that difficult to add in a few elements. And it doesn't have to be necessarily negative elements. just elements that they don't have mastery over. Like, any forest in the world, like, I can find my way perfectly. Well, what if the forest moves? What if the trees fly?
Oh, I like that one.
That's pretty cool.
Change things up a little. It doesn't have to be hostile. It just has to be a little weird, and you can suddenly find exploration is fun again. I wanted to touch on one thing before we finish, and that's maybe one of the other pitfalls of this is you were talking about making maps.
Yep.
If you're going to run this kind of map-based game, you should probably think about what you do if the players fail their navigation checks and get lost. If they should know that they're lost, or if you should allow them to make mistakes. Now, this is one of those DM versus players things that I think maybe Gygax might have poisoned the waters a bit on. Gygax is very happy to tell people to draw maps, and then very deliberately design his dungeons to mess up people's maps, so that all the maps they made were basically wrong, and they would have to go into the dungeon a second time just to fix their map.
Yeah, here's a grid paper to draw your map on. You pass through a series of oblong rooms and then go in a spiral down some stairs. Thanks, mate. How do I map that?
Yeah, that's not great.
Or the case of the corridor that's 200 feet long, straight line, no traps, specifically so that you don't notice that it's actually going down 10 feet and you're on the next dungeon level and your map doesn't line up anymore.
Don't be a complete Gygax. You know, it's not the way.
Never go full Gygax, I think is...
Never go full Gygax. Yeah, absolutely. Let's get t-shirts of that.
But yeah, like, if you're going to be in this sort of the players make their map mindset, you should really think about, are you willing for them to get things wrong? Especially if they're writing their map in pen, which so many people do. It's just like, well, this bit's right and this bit's right, but all the bits connect them completely wrong, so you're going to have to you have to give me 50 cents for a new grid paper because you've messed this one up. I would err on the side of the process of you failing your check and getting lost sort of time skips you to the point where you realize you're lost so that you don't accidentally fill in fake details on a map or something. So it's like if you fail your check, you're going like, so you wander around for a couple of hours and then 4 hours later you realize you're not in this hex, you're actually in this hex over here. But definitely just point to where on the map they are and like don't lie to them to force them to realize their mistake later. Not only does it tend to make players feel either that they're stupid or that they've been tricked, it's also a good way to, ruin people's maps and just cause all kinds of logistical issues. Not as in real world, like you may want in-game logistical issues, but you don't want out-of-game logistical issues.
If you want to play that game, your map, your master map, better be rock solid. Better be irrefutable. And you, as a GM, have to keep track of where your players are, regardless where they think they are. And then, at some point you're going to describe something so incongruous with what they're expecting or what they have on their map that they will realize that there's an issue here, which kicks off another really cool aspect of exploration, which we probably don't have time to go into right now. That is correcting your mistakes, or the old saw that the map is not the terrain. Never mind Google Earth. Go and crack open any sort of image archive of medieval maps and just marvel at how cool they are and how wild some of them are in terms of relationship to time and space and reality. They're always kind of aids to remembering where you went and how you got there. They're not necessarily going to be of much use to anybody else.
Err on the side of a mistake isn't going to shotgun your campaign. It's just you've gotten lost, you're in a different hex from where you thought you were. You're probably going to have some extra random encounters on the way back to where you're getting, but I would say make sure that these kinds of mistakes are permanent. They're just like another notch along the way of, well, you've used up more, you've lost more mules, you've used up more of your water. This may require you to change your plan. And just keep in mind, climbing a tree, going to the top of a hill, you'd be surprised how much that can expand the horizon. And smoke from villages is relatively visible, particularly if it's, the smoke of cannibals cooking up something interesting.
Also from party campfires.
That's true.
And combine that with going underground. So if you do want to get your players out into the heart of the unknown spaces again, send them underground and bring them up somewhere new. And then they can start. They have the joy of trying to figure out where they are and how to reconnect that back to their original maps.
Does the underworld connect only to your world, or does it connect to many worlds?
We have explored pretty much the limits of the of this episode now, and with those new terrifying horizons opening up, I think we should probably put down our pencils and put away our graph paper for a week. So we've been the Adventuring Party. I've been Savage Mick.
I've been Scarr, the Warlord.
And I'm Dave, and this party is over.
Thanks for listening to The Adventuring Party. You can find show notes and links to things we've mentioned at www.theadventuringparty.net and on our Facebook page. You can leave comments there, or talk to our Twitter account at AdventurePTY, or you can record a voice message at www.speakpipe.com/theadventuringparty. We can also be contacted directly by email at party@theadventuringparty.net. If you'd like to be in touch with the party all the time, come join our Discord server, link in the show notes. The Adventuring Party is released under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial Share Alike version 3 license.